I would now like to introduce today's webinar chair, Mike Cox, ALP's Business Development Director.
Hello, good morning everyone. Lovely to have you all here and so many of you on to what is the first of a couple of policy webinars for the Future Apprenticeships Programme. We're delighted to have ESFA here to deliver these. This particular one, putting policy into practice, use of the Apprenticeship Service. That's obviously formerly known as the Digital Apprenticeship Service. I need to also say that this webinar is part of the Future Apprenticeships Programme funding commissioned by the Education and Training Foundation. There's a whole range of other support available out there, so please make sure you access that, and as I'm sure many of you have. Not going to take very long to introduce things. What I will say is there are opportunities to ask questions, but please keep the questions related to the subject area. You can ask other things, but we probably won't be able to answer them live today. We'll have to take them back to ESFA to get those answered. But if you can keep them on topic, that'll help, and that'll help things go through. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Helen Gorner, Head of Service Engagement from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, who's going to deliver this webinar today. Please get involved, please ask questions, and enjoy yourselves.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. Good morning, everybody. As Mike said, I'm Helen Gorner, Head of Service Engagement with the ESFA, and I'm going to talk you through the Apprenticeship Service today. We're going to talk you through this from the perspective of an employer, so you understand what it is that an employer has to do and what it is that they see, so that hopefully that will help you in your work. So the aim of today is for you to all have a better understanding of the Apprenticeship Service, its key features and how it's been designed to be used by employers and by providers. We're hoping that this will help you within your training organisation with your employer engagement activity and any queries that you may get from employers. So hopefully that will put you in a better place to support those employer needs. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at what is the Apprenticeship Service, so summarise some of the core services that employers use to help them manage their apprenticeship programme. I'm going to look at what information employers need and why they need it so that they can register and set up their account. We're going to look very briefly at the structure of an account and the importance of users, PAYE schemes and connected companies. So again, if you get any questions, hopefully you can direct people to the right place. We're also going to look at the employer agreement, and I'll mention the other agreements that need to be in place as well. And then we will talk through the employer and the provider journey of adding an apprentice, so you can see what it is that you need to do, but also what it is that the employer needs to do to ensure that you, as the training provider, get paid. We're also going to talk about the payment cycle, so you can see how that all fits together and the key dates that are in there. And then finally, I'll talk you through some recent developments. So quite a lot to get through today, but hopefully we will get through within the time. So firstly, you can see on the slide in front of you, hopefully something that many of you are familiar with and have seen before, but this shows you the totality of the Apprenticeship Service, which is very much a group of online tools that have been created to support employers and providers when developing and managing their programs. The tools themselves have been developed with extensive user research with employers, providers and stakeholders, and they've been designed to enable employers to have greater control of their programme and the apprenticeship funding through the levy. Important thing to note that this service will open up to non-levy payers, but that will be from March or April 2019, and all sort of messages at the moment are that we're on track to deliver that. So currently most of the service is there for levy payers. I will highlight as we go through which ones non-levy payers can use. Of course, once we open it up to non-levy payers, then we will make sure that there is a period of time to help them prepare for that, and obviously to help you as training providers help those employers to prepare as well. There are things, as we said, that non-levy payers can benefit from now. So there are features such as find apprenticeship training and recruit an apprentice, which many of you may be familiar with under the old name of apprenticeship vacancies. They're live now, open for levy payers and non-levy payers. So what you've got on the screen in front of you, all those boxes that are in green show services that are available now, and the ones that are in blue show those that are in the final stages of development. And you can also see on there the pink box, which is showing yourselves in terms of the provider account, which is accessed through the Skills Funding Service. So what I'm going to do now is just summarise some of those key services for you, so you can understand what they are and how they're used, but just very briefly. So the first one you've got there is Estimate My Apprenticeship Funding. This has been live for quite some time, and we do know that there are a large number of employers that have been using this service. And what this is about is it's about enabling an employer to work out if they will pay the levy or not, and if they will pay it, how much they're likely to pay, and how much they would have available to spend on apprenticeships. This will help all employers estimate how much the government will contribute towards the cost of the apprenticeship training and assessment, regardless of whether they pay the levy or not. So to use the tool, all the employer needs is they need to know their UK pay bill, their annual pay bill. They need to know roughly how many of their employees are living in England as a percentage, and they need to know the types of apprenticeships that they're looking to start. And once the employer has got that information, then they will be able to calculate the estimated payments to be made through to the training provider over the duration of the apprenticeship. They'll be able to see the costs of any co-investment broken down by month, and they'll be able to view an estimated monthly breakdown that includes credits, the estimated cost of training, the value of any co-investment payments, and the running account balance. So that's all shown on that bottom box. I appreciate that's quite small, but you actually can see on there the levy credit in the second column, the cost of the training broken down by month in the third column. The boxes that are shaded out is if the employer goes into co-investment, or if they're a non-levy payer, then they'll only see things in that box. So they'll see how much as the employer they need to pay, so they're 10%, and then the 90% that the government pays. And then the final column for those levy payers is where it shows the balance that is in their account. So that's something that employers are using now. If you are talking to employers and they're not using that, then I fully sort of encourage you to tell them that it's there and that they can use that. And all of these tools are available on the gov.uk site. So moving on to Find Apprenticeship Training. This is a service that enables an employer to find the right type of apprenticeship and training provider for their organisation. It's an easy-to-use online tool that allows the employer to search for a framework or standard. They can do that by putting in the job role or by searching on a keyword. If they're a non-levy payer or a levy payer, they'll be able to select the relevant training providers that are able to deliver the chosen framework or standard. And they'll be able to review information about training providers, including employer and learner satisfaction and achievement rates. So on the screen in front of you, you can just see the one on the left-hand side is a summary of a particular framework that the organisation has searched for. If they then want to find a training provider for that framework, there's a button at the top that says Find Training Providers, and that's where they then go through to the relevant screens to find training providers who can deliver the training that they want. The results that will come up are for training providers who currently offer apprenticeships and can be selected today. This has been updated to reflect the new register of apprenticeship training providers. And as a training provider, you need to be aware that employers could be selecting you this way. So you should ensure that your offer is up to date and that you're responding to any queries. We have had some employer requests recently going unanswered, so I would stress to you to be responding to those queries that come through. Remember, this is your shop window and it's a great opportunity for you to gain new business. So recruit an apprentice. This is where you as a training provider can post vacancies for apprenticeships and traineeships on behalf of the employers that you're working with. The service is free to use and it enables you to manage the employer's apprenticeship vacancies all in one place and feed back to the employers on the current status of each vacancy. We are planning to open this facility up to employers to be able to advertise their own vacancies at a later date. That will be within the next 3 to 4 months. The reverse side of that is Find an Apprenticeship, and that's the website where potential candidates will be able to see the vacancies that are advertised. It's easy to find on gov.uk and it enables candidates to search for apprenticeship vacancies. The candidate themselves can create a secure online account so they can apply for vacancies and set up any alerts for future apprenticeships. So moving on now, what I'm going to do is talk you through the Manage Apprenticeships section. So this is the section that is purely for levy payers currently. What we'll do is look at how employers set up their accounts and how they manage their funds and make payments to you as the training provider. So first of all, they need So the levy paying employers need to set up an account. They do this on gov.uk. There's a guidance page that provides key information on what the employer will need to register their organisation on the Apprenticeship Service. You can see that on your screen now. There is further information about the apprenticeship levy, and this can be accessed through the How It Will Work section of gov.uk. Hopefully you're all familiar with that. If you're not, I'd strongly recommend that you do read that How It Will Work section and put alerts on that, because that's where we will put any updates to any policy matters on there. So it provides key policy information on how the apprenticeship levy operates, and it explains other functions such as the English percentage, connected companies, and how employers can spend their funds. So moving on then, to set an account up, the employer will need some key information. You can see that on the screen in front of you. Because the levy is linked to the employer's HMRC payroll declarations and the PAYE schemes, then they need to get their organisation's Government Gateway login details. They need to be the organisation's Government Gateway details. We have had a number of employers who have used third parties and tried to use their login details, and they won't work. So they do need to use their own organisation's Government Gateway login details. If the person that you're speaking to doesn't know what that is, then we suggest that they speak to their payroll team. Their payroll team are the ones that usually have that information. And you can see there are links on there for if they can't find their details, we will give them further information through this screen. The other information that they'll need is their company's house or charity number, if they have one. They'll be able to add that in. Again, they can search for that using the buttons you can see halfway down the screen. If the organisation doesn't have those details, that's fine, they can enter those manually. So we do recommend that employers have that information to hand straight away so that they can then go on to register. So they would simply click, yes, I have everything I need, and then click continue. Once they've set up their account, I won't take you through all those screenshots, but once they've set up their account, it's really straightforward. They would go to this page. This page is their landing page, their home page, and this is where they will go to each time that they sign into their account. You can see there's lots of things on there that they can do. They can add, remove, or edit team members. So in other words, these are users. And they can manage their access levels. There are 3 access levels for different users. Some will just be able to view information but not make changes. Others will be able to add apprentices and view information. And then the 3rd one will have access to everything. So in other words, a super user. They'll be able to accept agreements, view information, manage PAYE schemes, manage organisations, manage apprentices and team members. And we do strongly recommend that employers have a minimum of 2 super users so that the account can be accessed if one of the users is on leave or leaves the organisation. The thing I'd stress here is none of those roles should be undertaken by a training provider because you have your own access. This is purely for the employer and for them to set up the users within their own organisation. You can see various other sections on there, and I'll talk you through some of them. We will talk about the agreements section. We will talk through the add apprentices section. You can see on there there's a finance section. That's where the employer can view their transactions, and it gives them a breakdown of their account incomes and expenditure. You can see on there also there are PAYE schemes that they can add to their account and remove them from their account. And within the section that says your organisations and agreements, the employer can also remove organisations or add any new connecting organisations to their account. They can also sign the employer agreement from here, and just be mindful that both the employer and you as the training provider need to have signed both agreements before any payment can be made. In addition, employers should register every organisation that will make an agreement with a training provider for apprenticeship training. And they should always use the organisation's legal name, and this should be the same as the contract for services with the training provider. Again, I'll talk about that shortly. Training providers, you will be asked to clarify the organisation that you're working with in order to ensure that payments are made to the right training provider from the right employer's account. So it's important that those details are correct. So that's the landing page where the employer will go to each time. What I'll now do is talk you through those agreements in a little bit more detail. So you'll see in front of you now a slide with all of the 3 agreements that usually need to be in place. We will ask the employer to accept an employer agreement for each of their organisations that will use their funds. And this agreement gives them the authority to access the funds in their account to manage their apprenticeships. They must agree to all the terms and conditions in the agreement and the funding rules before any funds can be used to pay for apprentices. Once the employer has signed this agreement, then they'll be able to authorise the Education and Skills Funding Agency to pay for apprenticeship training and endpoint assessments to the training provider that they have chosen. Likewise, as we said earlier, you as training providers will also need to sign your provider agreement to allow us as the ESFA to make any payments. As the employer negotiates and agrees the price that they're willing to pay for the apprenticeship directly with you as the training provider, they will need to set up a contract for services with you. and more information on that contract for services is available within the funding rules. It's also important to note that where the employer and the provider are the same or connected organisation, so in other words, what we call an employer-provider, then both the employer and provider agreements will need to be signed, but there may not be a need for a contract for services between the employer and the provider. For example, if it's the same organisation or one that's connected with shared control. So those are the agreements. The employer agreement can be signed at any point and does not need to be signed when the account is created, but it does need to be signed by someone that has the authority to sign it, and that's usually an individual that is a super user. So you need to make sure the person signing is a super user. The employer, as we said before, must sign the agreement before they can approve any apprentices in their account. And if the agreement is not signed, then the agency are not able to release funds to pay you as the training provider. So important that you make sure that any employers you're working with have signed those agreements. There are flags throughout the system that will remind the employer to sign their agreement, or will flag that they haven't signed their agreement. So hopefully they should recognise that. And again, remembering that each organisation that will enter into a contract with a training provider will need to be added to the account by the employer, and there are no restrictions on the number of organisations that an employer can add, as long as those organisations are connected to that company. Okay, I'll briefly talk you through how an employer will structure their account, but I think it's important to say that the way an organisation structures their account is predominantly up to that organisation. There are a number of rules that they must stick with, but they can set up the accounts in the way that best suits them. So the example that you can see on screen, the employer has set up one account following the guidance that appears on the screen. They've got one user, and they've got one organisation and one PAYE scheme. So that's the details that are on the left-hand side of the screen. You can also see that they have signed their employer agreement. So their account has been created. Now, in the example, they could have had more than one account to manage the funds, as long as they don't split any of the PAYE schemes across more than one account, and the organisations listed are connected companies. So you can see on the right-hand side in this example that they have, at a later date, added 2 more users, 2 more PAYE schemes, and 2 more organisations, and agreements have been signed for those organisations. So, as we've said, they could have set up potentially 3 accounts, as long as they weren't splitting those PAYE schemes and the organisations that they had added were connected. It's important for an employer, when they're setting up their account, to think about this beforehand and think about how they want to manage their account. So they'll need to think about the types of users that they want, what levels of access they want to give them. They need to think how they're going to manage their organisations and PAYE schemes. Do they want them all in one account, or do they want them split? They'll need to look at the PAYE schemes that are going to link to their account, as that's where the account funds are drawn from. And it's important to note that a PAYE scheme, as we've said, cannot be split, and the funds associated with it cannot be split across multiple accounts. So they'll also need to think about which organisations will have a contract with a training provider for apprenticeship training, and it's only those organisations that will be entering into a contract for services for apprenticeship training that will need to be added onto the account. If the organisation is not connected, as defined by HMRC, then they should not be added. And again, the employer needs to remember that any organisation listed should be the legal name that organisation uses. We have had instances where employers have added a trading name, and that's not appropriate. We've also had instances where they've added training providers in at this point. Again, they shouldn't be doing that. We need to make sure that the information matches the information that you as the training provider have for that contract, and that it's the same employer name on your contract for services as we have registered under the account. Remember that a connected organisation can be named and have signed an employer agreement on more than one account. So you can see there's choice for the employer here in terms of how they set up their account. So again, just some useful background information for you so that you understand how that works. I'm now going to move on and talk you through adding apprentices, so you can see how the employer adds the apprentice to the account so that you as the training provider can be paid. So you can see we're now in the employer account. You've got that blue banner down the left-hand side that says employer account. That's only for the purposes of the presentation. That doesn't appear on the screen when they're in the service. It's just so that you can see when we're in the employer account and when we're in your account as the provider. So they're wanting to go into add an apprentice. They've been talking to you as the training provider. They've decided they want to use you as the training provider, and you've agreed some apprentices that you're going to train. So they now need to add them into the service. So from here, what they can do is add new apprentices. They can review any requests that are in progress that might have come through from you as the training provider. They can update any existing apprentices, and they can set their payment order. So by clicking into add an apprentice, it creates a link between the employer and the training provider, again ensuring that you get paid. So they go into the add an apprentice screen. You can see there's some information that the employer needs before they start. So obvious things like they need to know the names of the apprentices. Importantly for you as the training provider, they need to know your UK provider reference number. So make sure that your employer, the employers you're dealing with, have that reference number. Again, that's so that we can make sure we're matching the right employer to the right training provider. The employer needs to make sure the organisation that's named on the contract for services with you as the training provider is in their account. Again, we've mentioned that earlier. And they need to make sure that the PAYE scheme that each apprentice is paid through is in the account. So that's the information that they need before they can start to add apprentices. They now go on to start adding apprentices, and they can choose. They can choose whether they, the employer, will add the apprentices or whether they will ask you as the training provider to add apprentices. If they choose to hand it over to you as the training provider, then all they need to do is set up the request and then approve the data when you as the training provider send it back to them. And as training providers, you will also have the ability to bulk upload a cohort of apprentices. There will be that feature will be opened up to employers later on in the year, but currently that's only available to providers. So quite simply, the employer will tick whichever box they want to do. We're going to assume that they're going to add the apprentice details themselves. So if they choose to add the apprentice details themselves, then as a minimum, they have to put on the name of the apprentice. So they might put the name of the apprentice on and send it through to you for you to fill the rest of the information out. Or they may continue and fill out the information themselves. Again, remembering that the employer will only be able to approve the release of payments once all of the apprentice information has been completed, either by the employer themselves or you as the training provider. So the fields that need to be completed, you can see on the screen in front of you. You've got the apprentice's full name, their date of birth, the training that they're undertaking. You can see the planned start date, the estimated end date, and the total price for the apprenticeship training and the endpoint assessment if that's applicable. excluding any VAT. And this price that they put in there is the price that they have negotiated with you as the training provider. It's not the funding band limit. So it could be a price that goes above the funding band limit. And as you should be aware, anything that is above that funding band limit, the employer needs to pay in full directly to you as the training provider. They've also got the option in here to put in a reference number so that you can easily identify an apprentice. That could be staff ID, it could be the location of the apprentice, the name of the company that the apprentice works for. It's entirely up to you and the employer. You've got a little box there about the assessment, and at the endpoint assessment will need to be at the end of each apprenticeship standard. The employer will soon be able to select their endpoint assessment organisation through their account, and you'll be aware that the current register is available on gov.uk. The employers can use the current register to select an organisation to deliver endpoint assessment for them, and once they've selected their endpoint assessment organisation, then it's their lead training provider that will contract with that assessment organisation on behalf of the employer. You'll probably remember from the funding rules that we expect that the cost of endpoint assessment should not exceed 20% of the funding band maximum. And again, it's important to note that if an endpoint assessment organisation isn't currently available on the register and the employer can't get a suitable estimate, then they should put in the price they've negotiated for the cost of training, and they'll be able to add the assessment costs at a later point. And there is further guidance on this on gov.uk. So moving on. Once the employer has added all the apprentice information and checked that the details are correct, so again remember that it was the employer that was entering the details in this example, they now have the option to approve those details and send it through to you as the training provider. The bit that you will need to add in this part is the unique learner number. So even if the employer has entered all the other details, you as the training provider will still need to add in the unique learner number. The employer could have partially completed the information, so they'd want to send it through to the training provider to add and review any details, or it might well be they've added some information but they want to review it later on, so they don't want to send it on to you. It's important at this point that the employer is checking that information and checking that it's correct when it's sent through to you. Likewise, you as the training provider should be checking that that information is correct, because we do need to make sure that the information matches with what you will be also putting on the ILR. You'll also, once the employer has sent this information through to you, the employer will get a confirmation and a reference number so they can track the employer, the apprentice through the service. If we now move on to your account, you can see there we've got the pink banner down the left-hand side, so we know now we're in the skills funding service. We're in your side in the provider service. So once the employer's added an apprentice, you as the training provider access your apprenticeship account through the skills funding service, and you would go into the section that's highlighted there in red, the Your Cohort section. And in there, you will be able to review, edit, approve, and add any apprentices to the requests that employers have sent through to you. So you can see in that screen there, you can see at the top how many apprentices the cohort relates to, how many incomplete records there are, and the total cost of that particular training. You can see that you've got the option then to add further apprentices individually or to bulk upload them using a CSV file. You can see that in the middle of the screen. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see John Smith, who was the apprentice that the employer had added to the account and sent through to you. Before you can approve that, remember you need to add the unique learner number, and you quite simply click through into edit to do that. So the bottom right hand corner, you click into edit to do that. Once that data has been checked and completed, you click Continue to go through to approval. And once those apprentice details have been approved, they will appear in the employer's account, enabling them to edit any of the details if needed, and finally to approve the information. If the employer has asked you to add the details, then you simply click Apprentice and you go through what we've just done in the employer side, but from your side. And again, as we said, you can bulk upload from there. If you need any further information about how to bulk upload, that is on the gov.uk site. So we now move on to editing apprentice details. Both yourselves as providers and employers can do that, but any edits that employer makes will also need to be approved by you as the training provider. And remember also, an employer can choose to pause, resume or stop an apprenticeship, but again they would need to be talking to you as the training provider to do that. So once both the employer and the provider have approved a cohort, then the apprentices become live, and then they will appear in the employer's Manage Your Apprentices section of the employer account. So what you can see on the screen in front of you. So from there, the employer can review and edit any of their existing apprentices. You can see again on the screen in front of you. You can see the apprentice that we've just added on there, John Smith, date of birth 1st of January, and he is currently live. So you can see there the name of the apprentice, their status, their date of birth. They can see the training program that they're on, and they can see the provider details. They can filter those in different ways, as you can see on the left-hand side, and they can go in and view more information about the individual apprentice by clicking View on the right-hand side of the screen. So if they go onto that right-hand side, you can see there all the information that the employer will be able to see about that particular apprentice. And if they do want to edit it, you can see there's an option to the edit status if they did want to pause the apprentice's apprenticeship, or if they needed to edit any of the details for the apprenticeship, they can do that on the bottom, the second one that's in red. So we said the employer has the choice of pausing or stopping the apprenticeship. They can do that, or if actually they don't want to change the status, they've got the option to click on that button as well. So a couple of things to note here. If the employer pauses or stops an apprentice, then this obviously will impact on the payments that are made to you as the training provider and your monthly ILR return. So it's important that you have that close relationship with the employer so that they can tell you when they're making any changes, so that you're talking to each other, you know what changes are about to be made and the impact that they will have. If an employer chooses to pause the apprenticeship for whatever reason, they can resume that at a later date. However, if they stop an apprenticeship, they'll not be able to resume that apprentice's learning without going through the process of adding that apprentice again as a new record. So it's important that the employer selects the right option. Again, another reason to make sure that you're having that dialogue with the employer. Any edits that are made by the employer or the provider need to be approved by the other, and it won't become live until it's fully approved. You as the provider will be able to see any changes an employer makes from within the Ready to View section of your provider account. So now let's move on and look at the employer and provider cycle. We've just seen how you add and approve apprentices, made the point that we need to make sure that all the information is approved by both parties, that both parties need to have signed their agreements before any payments can be made. And also we need to make sure that the information matches. So whatever is in the apprenticeship service matches to what you as the training provider will be putting on the ILR. It's only when all those things are correct and match that we will be able to make that payment. Remember as well, obviously we can't payment unless the employer has actually declared their levy and has set up their account. So what you can see in front of you is the employer and provider payment cycle. You can see that the employer needs to declare their levy to HMRC by the 19th of the month, and then after the 23rd of the month, then the funds will appear in the employer's Apprenticeship Service account, obviously if they have set up an account, as we've previously discussed. On the 4th working day of each month, then the training provider will need to submit their ILR. This data must match the data that is held within the Apprenticeship Service. So it's important that the employers have approved all apprentices in the Apprenticeship Service account before that date. On the 5th working day of each month, the employer's Apprenticeship Service account will be debited for training received. Again, remember that's as long as the data matches and that there are no errors. And then finally, you can see at the top of the screen, providers are paid by the ESFA on the 11th working day of the month. So it's important to remember here that we're now in a situation where funding is different. We're in an employer-led environment. So it's important that the final agreements with the employer are made before you as the training provider submit that ILR. Because again, as we've said, we need to make sure that information matches. So make sure you're in close contact with the employer. You make sure that you've agreed which apprentices are starting, when they're starting, what they're doing, and that you've got all of that information correct and within the Apprenticeship Service before you start submitting your ILR. Something just to note here that I've been asked to draw to your attention. We're getting round to the hard close for the 2016-17 academic year. That hard close is on the 19th of October. So you need to make any amendments to the ILR data before that date. After that date, you will be unable to address any data lock issues from any previous ILR returns. And again, you need to make sure that the information matches what is in the Apprenticeship Service. So just remember, the hard close for the 2016-17 academic year is the 19th of October. We will be sending communications out about that. They will go via update and inform, so you do just need to be aware of that. So we're nearly at the end of the presentation. Just a few things, other things for me to mention to you. As you'll be aware, the Apprenticeship Service is constantly being developed and updated, and we do that based on user research and customer feedback. So it's important to us that we get your feedback, that we know how the service is working for you as a provider, and it's also important that you encourage your employers to also give us feedback. So throughout the service, everyone has the opportunity to click on the links to provide us with comments, as you can see on the screen in front of you. They are very quick surveys that enable you to tell us how you found using the service, and most importantly, how we can improve the service. So please do encourage your employers to take the time to complete those surveys, as this could impact on any additional features that we're looking to release in the future. Things such as notifications or changes to cohort boards and an enhanced organisation search tool are also additional features that we have recently introduced. There are some major developments, including the ability to set a payment order and enhanced email notifications, which I'll now show to you. So within the apprenticeship section of the employer account, employers will now see a new section that says Set Payment Order. This will allow an employer to change the order in which their providers are paid from their available funds. If there are not enough funds in the account to pay the employer's apprentices, to pay for the employer's apprentices remaining costs up to that funding band maximum, then remember they will be paid through co-investment. So we will always use what is in the employer's account first, and then any further funds will move into co-investment. The first provider that's added on to the employer account will automatically be ranked as number 1 and will be paid first from the account balance. Subsequent providers that will be added in descending order. To help employers manage their regular payments, they can now change the order. They can then regularly pay the same provider from the account funds first, and then invoices for co-investments will come from the training providers further down the list once the account balance reaches 0. Remember, from your perspective as the training provider, you're still going to get paid the full amount. It's just you may get all of it from the levy funds that are in the employer's account, or you may get some of it coming through from the employer made directly to you, and the other 90% being paid by the government, again directly to you from the ESFA. So remember here with the set payment order, the default payment priority is based on the first provider added to the account, the unique learner number, and finally the approved date of the training for that apprentice. Remember that payments will only be processed for those apprentices who have been approved by the provider and the employer. And as a provider, you will receive monthly reports to show which apprenticeships have been fully funded from the employer's accounts and which apprenticeships will need co-investment. These reports will tell you how much you need to collect from each employer for co-investment and for which apprentices. And those reports will be available alongside the other validation reports on the hub. So again, another reason why it's important for you to have that good relationship with the employer so that you know when they may fall into co-investment and when you might need to collect some funds directly from them. A further feature that we've recently added is one where employers will receive email notifications directly from the Apprenticeship Service. So these notifications contain a summary of changes that may need reviewing and any request changes from any data lock errors. So you can see the example on the screen there. In this particular example, there are 7 apprentices from this employer that need their attention. They've got 4 that need reviewing, and they've got 3 that have requested changes. So this reminder is just reminding them to look at them as soon as possible and reminding them that if they don't do this, then the training provider may not get paid from their available funds. These email notifications will be sent once a day and they will go to the registered account owners. However, if the owner or if the user decides that they don't want those notifications, then they can unsubscribe from receiving those email notifications from within the account settings. Providers will also get email notifications when the employer has sent a cohort for review and approval, and we will soon start to send provider email notifications for any change of circumstance, actions and data mismatches. So finally, where do you find further information and where do you direct your employers to any further information? You can see there, for only employers that haven't registered and set up their account, there is a link there that you can direct your employers to where they can see the guidance about registration. That's available on gov.uk. There's also a means by which you as a training provider and employers can keep up to date with the latest news in the service. You can follow the ESFA Digital at ESFA Digital. You can also follow us on Twitter, and you can read the ESFA's digital blog at the link there on the 3rd bullet down. There's always useful information on there that keeps you up to date with recent developments and also any future developments. So I do encourage you, if you haven't already, to start following those, and certainly encourage your employers to do similarly. And likewise, sign up to web alerts from gov.uk, because that, again, will automatically send you an email when content is added or changed. Finally, we've got the support information there. So additional support regarding the apprenticeship service is available for both yourselves as providers and employers. You can see their general queries about apprenticeships and accessing the apprenticeship service. Then you can contact our business support centre on the number that's available at the top there. There are numbers there for employers if they need to contact HMRC with any queries regarding general levy collection, about their levy calculation, or any connected company questions. There are helplines there, just like there are helplines if an employer has got any problems with their government gateway credentials. There's a specific helpline for that. And as you'll be aware, as training providers, you've got the service desk to go to for any other specific queries, or you could contact your provider manager. So that brings us to the close of the webinar. Thank you for listening to that. We have got a few minutes for questions, so I'll just hand you back to Mike to see if we have any questions there.
Oh boy, do we have questions. We have far too many that we're going to be able to get through in a time. But rest assured, everything you've asked, we will try and put a written answer to that, and we'll post that onto the Future Apprenticeships website along with a recording of this, because I don't know about you, I thought I knew this subject pretty well, but you've really gone into some detail here, which has been brilliant, and I suspect a lot of people will want to listen to this one again just to get the detail. There's a lot of questions that are quite technical around the ILR and around the payments process, which I don't think we'll be able to go into too much detail. But one question that did come up quite a lot was about the employer agreement. So I don't know if you want to just reflag that bit about employer agreement and levy payers and non-levy payers and multiple employers with a single provider, etc. Can you just give us a bit more clarification on that?
Okay, so the employer will need to sign the employer agreement for each organisation that will be contracting with a training provider for apprenticeship training. So you may have, as we saw earlier, you could have a number of connected organisations in one account, and you may have, say, an overarching company, a holding company, whatever you want to call it, that is perhaps the owner of that account, but you might then have got connected companies in there as organisations that are connected to that main organisation. It could be that that main organisation, so the organisation that has set up the account, it could be that they are the ones that are having all the negotiations with a training provider, and they're the organisation that deals with everything to do with purchasing and procurement. So they might be the one that you as a training provider are negotiating with. So it's them, then that organisation that would need to sign the employer agreement. However, there are
and it's all online. It's all online, isn't it? It's all a digital account. There's no paper changing hands here.
Absolutely, that's right. It's all digital. There's no paper, unless you want to have paper. That's entirely up to you. But you could have an organisation that has a specific, that lets each of their individual branches or connected companies have those negotiations with a training provider, and if that's the case, then that's where they will need to be set up on the account and would need to sign an employer agreement. And it's important, as we've said, to make sure you know as a training provider, you know who you're dealing with, you know who's responsible for procurement and sort of purchasing, and which organisation has signed those agreements in the account, so you make sure your contract for services is with that same organisation. That's an important point to make.
Okay, and we do just one last question because we're actually over time now, pretty much. Well, I'll answer it myself really, because I'm often asked by providers, how do we know that the employer we're going to work with has got enough money in their account? Why can't we see it? Why can't we access that? It's the employer's account, you can't. Is there any advice you can give on that, Helen, about how would you rather providers and employers work together on this?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right there. It's the employer's account. It's their money. It's a bit like, you know, you sort of asking me how much money I've got in my bank account. I'm not likely to tell you that. So it is the employer's funds. It's their funds to do as they wish with in terms of apprenticeship training. So again, I would be strongly recommending that you have that close working relationship with the employer so that you know exactly what you're doing, you know what you've agreed, which apprentices you're training, when you're training them, where you're training them, how you're training them, and most importantly, the funds that go alongside that, so that you would be fully aware of whether there would be any chance that this organisation might run out of funds in their account and that they might move into co-investment. So it's important that you have that dialogue with the employer. Remember, the employer is in the driving seat here. This is an employer-led system of funding.
And moving into co-investment is still fine. You can do that. You can buy an
Absolutely.
apprenticeship, or the employer can buy an apprenticeship with more money in their account. The system will tell them if they're please, am I right? The system will tell them if there's not enough money in their account to do what they want to do.
Absolutely. Yep, that's right. So the employer will know that. They'll be able to see that that's the case, that they're moving into that co-investment status. Likewise, you as training providers will see when you get your reports if that particular organisation has moved into co-investment, at which point you would see that you would have 90% of what you perhaps were expecting to receive, and then it would be flagging to you that you need to go and get that remaining 10% from the employer. So yes, there's no issue in that sense in moving into co-investment.
And I think that's really all we've got time, because my screen's now flashing red. But I just can't thank you enough for putting the time into there. And there's also, unbeknownst to the audience, there's somebody behind the scenes from ESFA, Paul, who's done a sterling job of responding to some of these questions as well. You'll get a lot of that stuff fairly quickly, I'm sure. I would encourage you to have a look at this again, because there's a lot of detail there, and most importantly, work really, really closely with your employers and be open and honest about what you can do and what your expectations are from them. Another little plug, ALP has got an employer contract in place. Please use it if you're an ALP member. If you're not an ALP member, you can get it for free if you are an ALP member. That's all from me, so I'll just sign back to Ralph, who'll close us down and give the feedback.
Thank you, Mike and Helen, and thank you everyone for attending today's Future Apprenticeships webinar, Putting Policy into Practice, Use of the Apprenticeship Service. If you have any other questions, please contact the events team at ALP. Once you leave today's webinar, a survey about the webinar will appear on screen. We would be grateful if you could spare a minute to complete the survey. The scoring system is 1 for excellent and 5 for poor. Thank you. You will then receive a follow-up email, usually within 48 hours, with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, along with a link to view a PDF of the slides. On behalf of ALP and our presenter, thank you for joining us today. Please enjoy the rest of the day.